Hello, everyone. I'm Kara. I head up marketing here at Hillstrong Group Security, and I want to welcome you to today's live webinar, Safeguarding the Backbone of the Industry, Essential OT Cyber Insights. We're thrilled to have you join us as we dive into the ever-evolving world of OT cybersecurity and explore strategies to protect industrial control systems and critical infrastructure. It's my pleasure to introduce our expert panel. Today we have Roger Hill, our founder here at Hillstrong Group Security, Derek Harp, founder of CSA, Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, and also founder of the upcoming Level Zero Cybersecurity Conference. Last but not least is Andrew Ginter, VP of Industrial Security at Waterfall. And also Andrew's a well-known OT cybersecurity author. Each of these gentlemen have decades of experience under their belt and play a key role in OT cybersecurity. Their deep understanding of operational resilience and cybersecurity integration makes them vital voices in today's industry. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. Remember, this is a live webinar and we welcome your participation, so feel free to share questions in the chat throughout the session, and we'll do a Q&A at the very end. Without further ado, let's get started. Roger, I'll turn it over to you and let you all dive in.
Hey, thanks, Kara. I really appreciate everyone attending this morning. Listen, let me just kind of kick it off really quick. As Kara mentioned, my name is Roger Hill, founder of Hillstrong Group Security. I'll give you the very short version. I think a lot of people know me out there. 30 years in industrial automation, Siemens and Rockwell Automation. So what's unique in my journey is deep expertise in engineering systems, specifically on the PLC and distributed SCADA side, but also on the product security and security of the systems. With me is Andrew and Derek. So let me ask you gentlemen both to give your introductions. Andrew, you want to start?
Sure, real quick. Andrew Ginter, VP of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. I work with a small team of subject matter experts. We work with the world's most secure industrial sites. My background, I bounced around as a youth. I settled into developing control system product, a niche product for Hewlett-Packard, historians, HMIs. I moved into Agilent doing middleware that connected control systems to SAP. That was the thing to do in the mid-1990s. We connected a lot of IT and OT networks, thereby contributing to the cybersecurity problems that now plague many industries. I got religion. I wound up the chief technology officer at Industrial Defender, developing the world's first industrial SIEM. And, signed 15 years ago with Waterfall, where I have the opportunity, again, to learn from and write about the world's most secure industrial sites. They ask different questions. They get different answers. They look at the problem differently. So it's been a great ride.
Awesome. Looking forward to the discussion here, Andrew. Derek, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the very gracious invitation to be part of this today. And I've gotten to know both of you over the last decade or more, and what a pleasure to be together with both of you today. I'm accidentally a community organizer. My heritage is entrepreneur. And so I started a cybersecurity or information security company in 1997 with some other folks out of the DoD as we were all getting ready to leave the military and various departments of the government. And that was my foray into it. Exposed in the military to some aspects of it, and let's start a company. And so around 2010 is when one of my good friends and co-founders of that first company said, "Hey, there's this whole other sector of this industrial control system area." And so for me, I don't have an operations background, an engineering background. It's more sort of entrepreneur in cybersecurity, and we began to look at unmet needs in this OT space. And so since 2010, I've been involved in a variety of projects, not all startups, but also startup initiatives, the GICSP certification. I was the co-founding chairman of that committee. So it's been about creating things. I think that's probably the theme of my 27 years is creating things with other people, always with other people. So whether that's a company or a certification or a product or a service or a committee on something, that seems to be, what I'm smack dab in the middle of all the time. And then discussion groups that I started in some cities 10 years ago have turned into this, global organization that we call CSA today. But it really was about, getting together in Houston, getting together in Calgary and DC and talking about this problem. And more people said, let's have more and more of these meetings. And that became what CSA is today.
Speaking of, it's great to see how that's taken off. And I think you've done a phenomenal job, and it's a great community effort, quite frankly. I remember the early days working with you, and listen, that was just hats off to you. That's really great, and it's really helped the community grow.
I would say you would have been at the very first or second meeting that ever happened, because it started in Atlanta, where we both are. And Andrew's not far behind you, getting involved in Calgary, which is probably the third or fourth place we came into being. And he came to the very first meeting in Calgary. And so you have seen that 10-year arc from just an ad hoc handful of meetings to more than 40,000, signed up community members today, and our first annual conference coming up.
Yeah, that's awesome. Guys, I think there's a unique blend of different experiences. We all have our unique journeys along our path, and we have enough gray hair to tell some interesting stories along the way. So I think we're going to have some really interesting discussions here today. Maybe to kick it off, one of the things that maybe just kind of monitor some of the buzzwords out there. Everyone's talking about cyber resilience, operational resilience. Listen, I'm guilty. I'm always talking operational resilience. I thought a great point to start a conversation with is maybe let's level set on each of our own perspective of what our own definitions are for cyber resilience and operational resilience. Andrew, you want to start?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I mean, the textbook definition of resilience is, it's a spring analogy. It's, you've got a system, you put it under stress, and, it doesn't break. And when the stress is relieved, it returns to most, of its original shape and form. The stress, the system we're talking about is industrial control systems. The stress is a cyber attack. The term resilience, I've bluntly struggled with. I think it means too many things to too many people. The initial analogy works, but when people talk about resilience, they talk about it as, in a sense, the goal, the where everybody's going, and what you're doing to get there. People tend to fixate on one or two things, drive that, and then sort of miss the bigger picture. The bigger picture to me is, what are we assuring in terms of our physical processes? We're assuring, our automation needs to assure safe, reliable, efficient operations of the physical process. And resilience seems to mean something else. I struggle with it.
That's an interesting perspective. How about you, Derek?
Yeah, that is an interesting perspective. And in full disclosure, I've learned a lot from Andrew. So I sometimes share things that if you trace back to some over the last 10 years, it probably came from Andrew. But he's one of my sources for learning, and I've read all of his books. Listening to him talk about safety being something other than resiliency, that resonated with me. Where I went, or where I go with resiliency, when I first heard about this, when I got, crossed over into this industry, again, about 15 years ago, I just brought my military thought process on our ship as a damage control officer. It was about, if this part of the ship goes down, this part of the ship mustn't. And if this part goes down, how do we quickly can recover it? If we have a fire here, or we have, part of the ship, suffers damage, how do we have redundancy and triple redundancy? So the mission, the core mission is still achieved. And so when I first heard people talking about this in the asset owner, part of the marketplace, so like that it was such a critical, important term. And that often IT centric background people, which has been the area I had been doing information security in, and, we didn't understand that resiliency was not something we were oriented around. And so I could see very quickly that that term could mean different things to different people. And so to say that's the pinnacle term, and it's, I suppose any of our terms, that are in high use are open to misuse because somebody can say, that's not how I interpret that, or that's not my number one goal. But I always use that military sort of keeping the ship alive and keeping it achieving whatever its main mission is, no matter what's going on.
No, I kind of resonate with that. And, I can't help but to flash back when you talk about the Navy to some of my personal experiences in the past and having designed and worked on some of the distributed redundant SCADA systems for ballast tanks of aircraft carriers. So, I think it makes sense. Andrew, I really like, I think the definition, I think is spot on in terms of resilience. I might take a slightly different perspective. I think right now there's a lot of folks out there talking about cyber resilience. And I think there's interesting different takes on that. But for me, I like to think about the mission. So specifically, one of the things that I'm focusing on today is really with the global manufacturer segment. And as a segment, there's a lot of different verticals, within that. And I like to think about the mission of the organization. And the mission is to produce a product to the number of units that you're anticipating, at the cost you're expecting, at the quality you're expecting, and then distribute that to a point of sale and sell it. Everything else as part of that business is part of that mission. So when I think about operational resilience, it's the ability, really your definition, Andrew, it's the ability to anticipate, withstand, and recover from an incident, and then adapt to those operational disruptions. Now, those disruptions may be cyber incidents in my version of operational resilience. So I think that's the ultimate goal that I like to really think about in terms of we're driving towards. So it's an overarching umbrella. I've struggled in the past with some of the buzz terms that have come out of our space, right? So the original term of Internet of Things, it all started from a PowerPoint presentation, right? Mm-hmm. Even the term OT security, I still remember the first time I was at a meeting when someone used that term, and like, what's that? Well, that's what you are. So, it's just cyber hygiene. That's another example, right? So we've had all these different buzzwords, in our journey. But I think based upon all the buzzwords I've heard, I kind of like resilience a little bit more because I think it helps to describe the mission.
Yeah. So let me qualify. Having heard you two, let me say,
it's all opinions, right?
One of the challenges with resilience is that it means different things for different kinds of facilities. You talked about manufacturing. Resilience in an automobile plant is different from resilience in a passenger rail switching system. These are different animals. Resilience. I had one concrete example in the CCE book. Countering cyber sabotage. If you turn off the lights, that's a disruption of critical infrastructure for a period of hours. If you destroy the transformers, you're down for months. We can tolerate disruption. We cannot tolerate destruction. That's another kind of resilience. It's a different kind of resilience. It seems to mean different things in different domains. And if you apply one domain's approach to resilience in the other, you wind up missing things. Is kind of what I've discovered.
I think it depends upon the impact you're looking at, regardless of the segment. Even if you're looking at an automotive line, right? So if you're looking at a body form and pier station, right, there is that safety consequence, the human safety element that can come into play. A chemical facility, it can be more of an environmental impact. So I think there's elements specifically around CCE, right? I think that is where you can definitely look at that impact-driven scenario, that consequence-driven scenario in a lot of different segments. Listen, we've all been around long enough. The nuance is in the cyber-physical process itself, and I think that's what's kind of interesting. The challenge is so maybe this is you introduced cyber-informed engineering and the consequence cyber-informed engineering, Andrew. And I know you focus a lot on the book. So maybe let's just kind of pivot a little bit and maybe talk about your latest book and we can
Sure.
discuss cyber-informed engineering for a little bit for those in the audience that might not be familiar with the topic.
Sure. My latest book is Engineering Grade OT Security. You can see it in the back there. I didn't call it cyber-informed engineering because I wrote it in the early days of CIE. I didn't really know where the CIE initiative was going. In hindsight, maybe I should have used the term because, CIE is going in exactly the right direction. The book introduces, the subtitle is A Manager's Guide. Okay, I fly high and slow. It's an easy read for anyone with the background of you gentlemen. Introduce what is OT, introduce automation, introduce cybersecurity for people who are familiar with OT and don't understand how much trouble we're in, introduce cyber-informed engineering and sort of the engineering perspective on cybersecurity, and then build up to answering the question, how much is enough? How much security? How much engineering in, which kinds of systems and why? A small shoe factory deserves a very different perspective on security than a high-speed passenger rail switching system. And cyber-informed engineering, I position it again at high and slow. Not my quote. I forget where I first heard this, but I love to describe it as a coin with two sides. One side of the coin is cybersecurity. Teach engineering teams about cyber threats, teach them about cybersecurity tools, teach them about the limitations of every one of these tools so they can look at a defensive posture and evaluate residual risk. How much risk could we still have here? The other side of the coin is engineering. If your life depends on a boiler not blowing up, how would you prefer to be protected from a cyber attack that overheats the furnace? Would you prefer a mechanical overpressure relief valve where if the steam pressure is too great, it forces the valve open, the steam escapes, and nothing blows up? Or would you prefer a longer password on the PLC controlling the furnace? The gurus say, Andrew, you're deceiving us. You're asking the wrong question. I want the mechanical valve, thank you. It's unhackable. I want 4 of them because there's corrosion, there's metal fatigue. I need one of these 4 to work to save my life. And I want the longer password on the PLC. And I want an absolute boatload of cybersecurity beside it because this is my life on the line. And this is CIE. It's a big umbrella. It's got relevant parts of safety engineering, protection engineering, automation engineering, network engineering, and most of cybersecurity, all under the big umbrella. We all have to talk to each other if we want this to work. And here's the thing. The engineering side of the coin. I mean, you spend the whole coin. You don't choose which side of the coin to spend. You spend a coin. But the engineering side's been neglected. Where is the pressure relief valve in 62443, in ISO 27001, in the NIST cybersecurity framework? There's no hint of it. This is not a security tool. It's an engineering tool for managing physical risk from all causes. And these tools, I've seen them used in high consequence sites, but generally speaking, they are not used systematically. They are not used universally, and they should be. So this is CIE. It's the big umbrella. CCE, cyber or consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, fits as a piece under the big umbrella. Some engineering in there, but some security stuff in there as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So, Derek, what are you seeing from your work at CSA, for example, in the global community? I mean, you have a lot of members. What is the level of traction or interest that you're seeing around cyber-informed engineering?
That's an interesting question because we are very diverse, as I know that you know. In our 40,000 people, like, what kind of people are in there? And I'm like, well, everybody's in there. There's different quotients of industry verticals. There's different quotients of entry level to senior level, people. And so, I think what I have been excited about, and what frankly this upcoming conference, level 0, and very, very, very early discussions about, what should a new conference, not just the let's make a conference, but what's a topic that needs, and deserves even more attention around it, and has a constituency that may not be aware of it. Part of your answer to your question, and should be, could be, will benefit from. And so there might be a bunch of people out there in engineering or operational roles that have still never heard of it. That's my assumption, without saying it doesn't, it has a following, it's gaining momentum. My perspective would be a great number of people aren't yet familiar with it. And so we sort of organized around, okay, so that's something that CSA and Level Zero can help contribute to. I mean, my God, it's going to have to be all of us, but we could contribute to shining more of a light on this body of work and what's involved with it. And so I think, and I can't prove, there's a lot of people that have not heard of it yet. But that's a tremendous opportunity, and to get them bridged to it and connected to it. And it fits with my whole thing that I'm a fan of, which is we need all the stakeholders. I always look at it, a puzzle or an ecosystem, all these different analogies, gears, and then we all fit together. And for the sort of state we all want to be in, certainly all of us that are working, focused in this area, it will not be achieved by, this one stakeholder group, the products or consultants or just the people at the plant. It'll be by us all doing our part. And so by getting a whole group of people that might not be fully utilized or utilized at all today to say, we could get rid of some cyber risks, just engineer them out, use the expertise of this group to take that class of risk and just get rid of it. Does that mean, okay, we've arrived, they did it all? No, just, it's a big puzzle. What if a whole group that might be underutilized just knocks out X% of risk profile? We still need to address some of the other risks in other ways, but that's a success. That's a win, right? And so I like it as bringing in, I hope, a whole nother constituency, in a more powerful, meaningful, statistical way into the overall problem. I'm a big believer in team, and not, and this would be a big piece.
So I like that. One of the, and Andrew, you mentioned, the engineering process side of it. And I think that is a really good segue to kind of talk about the scalability factor of CCE and CIE, right? So that's one of the things that I look at of being somewhat of a challenge when I look at some of the different technical tools and methodologies that have emerged, right? I think there's different merits and ways to evaluate risk of these different cyber physical systems. Having said that, one of the missing components is, how do you do this at scale? And then number one, and then number two, it's never going to take off unless you get the buy-in at senior leadership to get investment. The entire world operates off of financial metrics, right? So we need to understand and do some financial quantification of these risks as a translator, if you will. So I think that's one element. When I think about a company, a Fortune 500 that has, 100, 200 sites globally, different types of manufacturing and process facilities and distribution centers, right? When you think about that type of scale, one of the things that I would think about, Andrew and Derek, is from a cyber-informed engineering, how do we do this at scale? Number one, I think to your point, Andrew, it's about integration with your existing engineering processes. PHA, process hazard analysis, right? If we can integrate that centrally into the processes that we're already doing from a centralized engineering organization, number one, okay, that's good. But then when we look at our fleet of sites, I think we need to take a step back and think about almost defining classification tiers in terms of business risk of our facilities based upon financial metrics impact to the organization, environmental, safety, maybe internal supply chain, things of that nature, or we could define maybe a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, so that once we've done that, we can maybe say, okay, for our tier 1 series of sites, this is the roadmap and how we want to integrate CIE and CCE into that. Let me just open up to what you guys think about. The idea is, how do we scale?
There's two elements of scale. And I struggle with this. So let me say I'm going to talk a little bit about rooftop solar inverters as an example. But let's do that. Let's just one of the criticisms of CIE is that many of the engineering tools that exist today have been set to the wayside. There are boilers out there that no longer have mechanical overpressure relief valves. How can this be? It's because the valves are expensive and they corrode and the metal fatigues and eventually they fail and they have to be inspected. And this is why the world has gone digital. Because the digital solutions are cheaper and even more reliable in the absence of cyber attacks. Now, cyber has thrown a monkey wrench into that calculation, and everyone is reevaluating that. My response is that don't think of CIE as regurgitating all those old tools and bringing them back into play. To me, if you give engineering teams a mandate to solve a problem and say, these are the parameters of the problem, you need a deterministic solution. You need one that is not going to fall over even in the face of the most sophisticated, credible threat. They will invent an efficient solution. Now, it takes a little time. It doesn't happen overnight. Let me give you a concrete example. Rooftop solar inverters. Doesn't matter if it's in your home or on top of a shopping center. Solar panels have no CPUs in them. They're stupid. All of the intelligence is in the inverter. And modern inverters, the trend is to be all silicon. Okay, there's no longer, you got to do voltage transformation. You got 950 volts coming off the solar panel, somewhere between 350 and 950. You got to convert it to the alternating current of the grid. That's what inverters do. There's no longer transformers with wires wrapped in there that do sort of a fixed voltage transformation. It's all silicon, meaning the CPU controls it all. If the CPU is compromised, it can change the voltage transformation so that it's a different output voltage. It's now arguing with the grid. What's the symptom of arguing with the grid? Heat. The device overheats. It's supposed to have the capability of understanding it's getting too hot. You can have an electromechanical thermostat in there, tripping the device when it gets too hot. Or in the modern device, it's all silicon. Compromise the silicon, you compromise that heat relay function, and the device bursts into flames. This is not how it's supposed to be. The solution to me is not go back to electromechanical transformers in these devices. The manufacturers want them to be all silicon so that the same device can be deployed in Europe as in North America, as in other parts of the world. It has to be all silicon. The solution is not go back to the old way. The solution is 2 CPUs. One CPU is network exposed. It's talking to the grid. It's talking to the Bluetooth on the cell phone so you can configure it. The other CPU is carrying out the safety critical functions. And the interface between the two is a very limited communications interface. Think, a little bit of shared memory or machine registers. This bit means that bit means that. They're not a messaging interface. It's an interface that an engineer could look at and say, there's no way malware can cross that interface. It just won't work. Don't be silly. And now you've got, again, 2 CPUs, tiny increment of cost, and enormously safer than the original. This kind of innovation is what, if you challenge your engineering teams, they will come up with. They don't have to go back to the old way of doing things. CIE is about the future, not the past.
So I think that's interesting. I don't know that I would necessarily frame it as the solution. I would frame it as a countermeasure, right? In terms of like an FMEA type failure mode effect analysis, right? I completely agree with you in terms of what the engineering teams, by defining what that countermeasure could be, because maybe that countermeasure is a redundant processor, right? CPU, or maybe it's Byzantine, or maybe it's XYZ, right? So, that I don't want to focus so much on the tactical. It's the process of defining what that countermeasure is that resonates with the actual system that you're protecting, right? Because again, based upon that tier, maybe your example is absolutely spot on, Andrew. Maybe it is a redundant, and I do completely agree with you. There's no put the genie back in the box, we're not going back to the old transformers, right? It's all about the engineering process, and I think that's the world that we're coming from and we're relating to.
The thing that's most exciting about the example that I think you just used, Andrew, is it indicates, or it what would make that work is the people creating things that today may be creating them to be resilient or sturdy or hardy or whatever, predictable, do it 4 million revolutions of it and not break. As long as they all become, as I'm designing this, I have all my criteria. Security is one of them. Of course, security is in my criteria. We're creating a thing, and when we create a thing, we think about the things we want to hit on, and security is part of it. And we all know that has not been true. And so I think if everybody who's involved in creating things, but I think what the industry is right now is we're reacting, right? We're adding things on top of and doing the best we can to make it work for things that were designed, that this wasn't part of it. So whether it's 2 CPUs or other types of design features, but they're not being designed or being imposed upon by outside security experts onto those engineers, that we have a whole future generation of engineers that say, yeah, we don't create products without thinking about its cyber implications.
I wanted to bring up. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say, one of the things I love about CIE is that, talking about this problem, CIE demands that we focus first on the highest consequence potential outcomes, the highest consequence events that we're trying to prevent. Unlike classic cybersecurity, I saw a draft standard. That's what triggered my thinking on this. I saw a draft standard for cybersecurity for rooftop inverters, and it said, to prevent password guessing, we should have 2-factor authentication. To prevent packet sniffing, we should use encryption. And I'm going, you're looking at the highest frequency, lowest impact attacks. CIE says nuts to that. Start with, when you do safety engineering, do you start with the highest frequency, lowest impact outcomes? No, you start with the big fish. That's what I love about CIE.
100%. I think this is a good segue. So Garrett, a few minutes ago, you mentioned level 0. So maybe first you can talk about where the idea originated, what this conference is. Let's talk about this.
And CIE is as we foreshadowed, is a part of that. It arose out of conversations of unmet need. It was in no way any criticism of any existing conference. All of us are very involved in other existing conferences. It was around. There's probably not probably there is, but I suppose in theory, as this conversation over the last couple of years, people that need to be brought into the family of cybersecurity for operational technology and don't have a conference that's designed for them. And so one of the main, if you say what would need to be on the plate, what are you going to serve to someone to say, here, this is the right conference for you. It's not for experts, although there's content maybe that appeals to some experts, but who's it for? CIE is one of those main, that's a big ingredient on the plate. It's not the only thing that we have organized around, but it's one that we've committed saying that's one of the main things on the plate. And let's attract some people to the conversation and to the mix who might not have previously gone to, this is my own theory, might not previously have gone to any OT cybersecurity conference or even any cybersecurity conference, but they're in the right profession and they're in the right part of companies to come become part of the conversation. And, early conversations, Andrew was involved in this, as was Ginter right at INL. And so CIE has been discussed as a, sort of a main piece of this. And I think Andrew's probably been the head cheerleader for this component of level 0, and can talk more to, what some of the talks and things on CIE. He knows what they all are because he's been sort of shepherding that. But that's my viewpoint is let's bring some people into the community, and add them to the mix. Let's bring people also who, just need to continue to round everything they know, but then let's bring some people to it that might not have been already there, but can be impactful tomorrow.
Love it. Love it. Andrew, I'm sure you've got some interesting stories up into the inspiration.
Absolutely. A great many of the events out there, Waterfall sponsors a lot of events. I visit a lot of these events, are focused primarily on cybersecurity. And, there's a lot of hallway discussion of IT and OT and engineering not getting, this is textbook for the last 20 years. What I think the world needs is a perspective that brings these stakeholders together and recognizes that no one body of knowledge can solve the problem. Cybersecurity cannot solve the problem, nor can safety engineering, nor can automation, and the textbook example is cybersecurity, enterprise security comes in and looks at a plant and says, "What's wrong with you people? Patch everything, put antivirus everywhere. What's wrong with you people?" And then it starts. The engineering team, to me, the correct response is, "I will be delighted to patch everything the moment you can tell me how likely that is to kill anyone." What? This is not a question enterprise security teams have to deal with. This is a question engineering teams deal with every day. And so, there's a learning process that needs to go on. Enterprise security teams need to learn that, many OT systems are special. The correct response from the enterprise security team is, fine, I get it. You can't patch everything. That does not make the threat go away. You're still going to be owned. How do you prevent the cyber attack from killing people? To which most engineering teams go, huh? And now the knowledge transfer has to go the other way. You need to understand how much trouble we're in. When you educate, in my experience, when you educate engineering teams in terms of how much trouble they're in, they demand protection. They pull the knowledge, they engage with the cybersecurity teams, and good things happen. But you need both sets of knowledge in the room. I've tried just doing a proper CIE risk assessment. You can't do it. One person can't do it. There's no person on the planet that has all of the knowledge. You need, a village. You need the different. So, and what we need is an event that recognizes this, that brings the stakeholders together, that explains all of the perspectives, that talks about the leading edge, the new innovations, the new design for a solar rooftop inverter, so that you don't have to go back to all the old stuff. There's nothing else out there that's talking about the problem this way. We need the right people to come together and talk to each other.
So one thing that I've been spending a lot of time talking about, and I think this is part of my own personal journey, and that is about tearing down the silos that exist even within our sector, right? Between IT and OT. Completely 100% agree. It takes a village. The cross-functional teams and intermixing those domain disciplines is absolutely crucial. On that note, Derek, who would you say are the personas or the type of roles that would get value and should be attending this level 0? Who are we? Who's going to get the most out of this? Is it from your perspective?
We're utilizing on day 2, day 3 simultaneous tracks, and so it expands our the ability to answer that in a broader way, because we do have content, and we're about to publish most of the agenda. We do have content that's appropriate for different stakeholders. So I would say we're certainly reaching out and saying if cybersecurity of operating technology is your job, obviously come. But I think we're saying if it's adjacent to your job or it's part of your job, come. This is where you can get some of that missing componentry. I think what's been clear in the different stakeholder groups is it's often like even excellence, real excellence in one discipline area, but deficiency in another. which doesn't take away at all from the amazing part of the career that they're at. It's just like, now it is a fusion. To be good at this, it requires expertise in all of them. No, because I think the Tiger team or the cross-functional teams, I'm a big fan of that as well. You don't have to be an expert in all of them, but if you can bring your vocabulary up and your empathy up, and you say, okay, so that's what you're having to deal with, and now I can bring my expertise to that conversation, to that Tiger team working group, cross-functional group, because I've gained enough more knowledge. And so the answer is we do. I mean, and Andrew sort of foreshadowed it. We want engineering and operations folks and cybersecurity for OT folks. Yeah, and you know what? Some IT folks. Come, especially if you're keeping the mail server up at your corporation, okay, maybe not. But if you're in IT where you see the dotted lines and you're in meetings and you've been stood in a couple rooms where you're like, okay, we're talking about this, nexus between our systems and their systems, then come and gain that 10%, 20% more knowledge. Our speakers are, veterans and experts of the space. And then the very next meeting you're in, you go, okay, that is what they are talking about. Now my sheer expertise, it's not taking away from what I know. I can apply it in a way that's going to be, they're going to hear and they're going to be willing to take on. And so I am a huge fan that's got to happen more.
Yeah,
it's a function.
100%. One thing that I was thinking about when you mentioned that is when we think about a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, right? I almost guarantee you it's somebody that's wearing both hats of IT and OT, right? If they're wearing an OT hat at all, right, from a security perspective. So, there's plenty of people out there that are really living in both worlds. So, and I think I remember seeing some work that you've done, Derek, and I think, Andrew, you might have been part of this in terms of some of the surveys for CISA around responsibility for OT security. And this is where, listen, I was wrong initially over a decade ago where I really thought OT security was going to live just within OT. And I think now it's clear that the CISO is the one that's really going to be responsible. The numbers are supporting that now. And hey, listen, they call it a journey for a reason, right? And going through my own personal journey, I look at things differently now. And I think you do need to have that CISO level visibility at an organizational level, but then you need to have that, responsible subhead for OT security, at least for a larger organization. But Andrew, what are you seeing out there in terms of responsibility in kind of the mix between IT and OT?
It really depends on the industry. It depends on the size of the facility. I was interviewing a gentleman, I don't know, 6 months ago, I forget the name. We were talking about small systems. And he says, Andrew, the small systems, they suffer from STP syndrome. What's that? Same three people. There's only three people. They do everything. And so to me, what the industry urgently needs, what many industries urgently need, is, well, bluntly, more out of the CIE team. The CIE team has published an implementation guide, but to me, it's a framework. It's a set of questions you ask. It's not answers. It's not a recipe. And the thing is, the recipe is going to vary by industry. It's going to vary by site size. What we need are recipes for small water systems and large automobile factories and small power plants and, high-speed passenger rail switching systems. And there are going to be different recipes in each of them because they're different physical systems. There's different, deterministic solutions you can put in to address different kinds of threats. We don't have any of this. We need to invent all of this. Who's going to do that? Level Zero is an event where people can come together and compare notes across industries, across functions within industry, across sizes of sites, so that we can build this body of knowledge. This is innovation. We need to invent solutions that don't exist. One of the good things about OT cybersecurity is that for the first decade, let's say 2010 through 2020, there weren't a lot of attacks that had physical impacts. That's changing. Ransomware has changed the equation. The last 3 years of war in Israel, in the Ukraine, even to a degree in parts of China, where there's conflict, there's physical conflict, has ramped up hacktivist and nation state attacks. The threat environment's changing. Okay, threats that were not credible a decade ago are credible today. Threats that are not credible today will be credible in another 5 years. There were 3 new malware variants came out this year that were ICS capable, versus 6 in the whole previous 14 years. 3 this year. The world is changing, and we need urgently to bring stakeholders together and invent solutions that don't exist. And I see level 0 as the first event that is pulling all of the right people together.
I think that's interesting. I definitely fall in that camp of, when we're talking about some of the threats, of course, it comes down to the impacts of the systems that were our cyber physical systems. I think we all agree on that. One of the things that I look at, though, is around critical infrastructure, to your point, Andrew, geopolitical and strategic. There are some threats that we absolutely need to take serious, and that's where cyber-informed engineering and CCE can be so valuable. I think when we look at a lot of the other operational technology space, there's a lot of FUD out there. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt raised by the vendors and everything else. And I think one of the most significant external threats to outside of critical infrastructure, to me, is ransomware. And it's targeting it because it's financially motivated, and it's proved successful. So until there's not money to be made, that's going to be a continued rise. What I think is and this is some of the silos that I think we need to tear down here, right? And I've mentioned this a few times. When we're looking at ransomware that impacts operational technology, that does not mean that the adversary or that actor has to necessarily get in and compromise the systems on that process control network or the control system network. Often it's that level 4 systems, right? It's billing systems, it's warehouse management systems. We need to look beyond north of that industrial DMZ and think in terms of what are the plant-based supporting IT systems that can have an indirect impact, that if we lose these systems, we have to force production to shut down. The impact is the same. So that's where I really like this idea of tearing down those silos and looking at that inner relationship and getting those perspectives so we can understand that true risk.
Absolutely. When the plant goes down, the CEO does not say, whose fault was that? You go fix your system. Okay, the CEO takes the head of enterprise security and the head of operations and knocks their heads together until this problem is solved. He doesn't care whose fault it is. He wants it fixed. And with the integration that's happening, both sides need to understand these principles. The principles are what CIE, the first generation of CIE advice is all about.
So I see there is a question coming in asking what our opinion is on the most overlooked vulnerabilities in OT systems that should be addressed. Wow, that's a separate webinar, I think. But who wants to take that one first?
I can deflect that one to Andrew.
I'm going to go real quick. There's a lot of them, but to me, the big fish, the elephant in the room, is bricked controllers. When we build whatever, a power plant, big iron, we deploy a whole bunch of PLCs, 200 of them, and we're probably gonna keep those PLCs for like 15 years. That's kind of 15, 20, something like that. So we buy 50% spares, because we need spares. If these things start failing, we can't upgrade. That's going to take us down for weeks or months. We need replace like for like. Great. The bad guys get in and they erase the firmware so thoroughly that you cannot boot the device enough to a state where you can put new firmware on it. Not all devices are susceptible to this, but a great many devices are susceptible to this. The bad guys get in and erase the firmware on all 200 PLCs. We have 100 spares. How are we going to come back up? Are we going to go to eBay? This is not going to work. To me, there's many equipment damage generally is a category that a lot of people are blind to, and bricked equipment, I think, is sort of the elephant in the room that we all need to start worrying about.
So it's definitely the worst case scenario.
But it's not the worst case. The worst case is people
Lowest
die.
probability, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Just to, put some operational realism there, but Derek.
Yeah, and really the
what do you
question
hear?
is this a credible threat? And 10 years ago, we just said for most facilities, no. What's happening? People are guessing passwords. There isn't this threat. Today, we've seen a handful of examples in the wild of large numbers of devices being bricked. Is it a credible threat? I think it is a credible threat. In the lifetime of the systems we're deploying today, we got to be thinking about this.
So I'll go ahead and give my take, and then maybe Derek, you can pile in. So I tend to at least lately, as part of my journey, right, to take much more of a pragmatic approach. I think just the complexity is the enemy, and as part of that, I look at some of the authentication bypass vulnerabilities that exist, and this isn't based on any single vendor. Almost every single vendor has had some susceptibility to this at one point or another, right? So that's all bad. So what does that mean? Number one, it means that you could modify the code base of what's running in that controller based upon a device being able to impersonate an authentic, maybe engineering workstation, as an example, right? Now, as bad as that is, the reality is if we just had a control that separated that process control network from the control system network. And what does that mean? That means that embedded real-time operating system, PLC controller, right, that is interfacing to the PC-based systems, 99% of which are running Windows, engineering workstations, some of the PC-based HMIs and distributed SCADA servers and things of that nature, right? That if we had a lower level firewall stateful where we can just have a policy, we can actually mitigate that risk. So when I think about a pragmatic approach, step one, do you have separation from IT to OT? Okay, great. If you do, your next step is think about, okay, if I at least separate the process control network from the control system network, and that gives me a tool in my toolbox to mitigate current state vulnerabilities as well as future state without maybe going to the utmost future state operating capability of security zones and conduits. Anyway, that's kind of my spiel there. Derek, how about you?
I'm gonna pivot because it's a great tie into Level Zero. I'm gonna say, and there's been some things said by I think all three of us that support this already today. All these situations are different, and so what's the number one vulnerability? What's the number one threat actor? We track a lot of that in our annual report. And there's some questions I see in the Q&A. I would say the annual report, the annual report, it is free on cs2ai.org. Download it. It's 88 pages last year. A whole team of people, including Andrew, thank you, contribute to year in, year out on that. And it does have those, top 5 and what are your top this and what are your top that. But I think what's most important, and certainly what I know there are going to be some speakers at Level Zero talking about is, you've got to figure out for you using a methodology, what for your plant, not even a company, because plant A and plant B at the same company, what's the number one, threat that, with the mathematical weighting and things, not, Andrew's already alluded to it, likelihood and impact, 2 separate variables, so, understand what you're going to mitigate and then, go after the one, and you can all be in agreement because you used the methodology. That's the one we're going to try to eliminate next. Because I think we've been lost also in this, like, oh my God, we got to do all this stuff, network segmentation, and we got to find all the assets. And what about patching? And in the end of the day, we cannot do all that. Yeah. So if we go and say, okay, instead of saying, what are all the problems, we got to do all these things. What are the top 5 threats? We got to mitigate all, every way that those could ever happen. Let's look at our plant or our facility. Let's use a mathematical weighted approach to the ones that are of the most, the highest priority. Let's do that one next and celebrate the heck that we just eliminated that one. So, it's a bit of a non-answer on what the number one vulnerability is. It's like, I don't know. What's the number one vulnerability to your location?
I think it's a pragmatic answer. I think it's really good. I think that leads into, I see another question here. What's the future trends in OT cybersecurity that organizations should prepare for in the next 5 years? Wow, loaded question. So in the 5 minutes we have, Andrew, you want to take a step at this one?
I am writing another book. I'm thinking the working subtitle, I don't think it's going to be the title. I think the working subtitle is CIE for the Safety Critical Cloud. The cloud is coming. The Internet of Things is coming. The vision for the Internet of Things is compelling. The cost savings are potentially enormous. The question is, how can we reap almost all of the benefits of the vision with almost none of the risk? And it's doable. So to me, this is the future.
So I think that's an interesting question. So here's my first attempt at a non-answer. Right? Now, let me just state this, that, in my past, I was a former global head of technology management. I've always had an ability and maybe a tendency to predict technology trends. And I think I've done that pretty well. Based upon my experience, though, when I don't think I can even predict beyond 18 to 24 months right now. The level of disruption in technology is at such an element. When you think about quantum, Gen AI, robotics, several different key areas, it's literally exponential and changing so drastically that I don't think anyone can predict beyond 2 years. Number one. Having said that, I would say that the big elephant in the room is you cannot ignore AI, and specifically Gen AI and some of the bots that can actually be utilized by a bad actor to craft a much more elegant and accurate and highly technically capable of phishing and spear phishing techniques, but also how many different cybersecurity companies now are leveraging different forms of Gen AI to help with analysis and threat hunting. Specifically, there's some really interesting things right now with agentic RAG and using some of the iterative-based analysis. So, listen, this is a rapidly changing world, and that's just my take on it. You can't ignore maybe some of the disruptors, but also the benefits that AI are going to be giving us in terms of tool sets. We just have to maintain the human in the loop.
So short answer is yes, and I will add to my answer. When I say the safety critical cloud, I'm thinking AI in the cloud, making safety critical decisions. So you're right.
Well, and I'll just jump in real quick. So Andrew, having come from the big vendors, what I can tell you is 2 out of the vendors that I've worked with, listen, it's coming. They're going cloud native in terms of very traditional industrial automation systems. So it's already actively developed and close to release in several different instances. So there is no ignoring it, if you will.
Cloud is what I was going to bring up, and not to isolate it from some of the other things. That's number one. I was just going to say I've been recently re-exposed again with an event we just had with five individuals from 4 super major oil and gas companies, and they wanted to add and sort of a panel between the 2 different panels, and it was a panel of all the essentially all the panelists of the day, and it was about cloud. And it was driven by one stakeholder who said, we're doing some cutting edge stuff. Now, did all 5 individuals from different oil and gas companies in different parts of the world, one in Middle East, one in Europe, 2 here, did they all agree? Not really, on what's happening and what's going on there, what would be permissible, what wouldn't. But they're all saying it's coming up in every meeting. It's coming up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I did gather from that and from some subsequent conversations is there are some things going on that not that long ago, a panel of experts was said, no way. And now there's asset owners. It's one thing for product suppliers to say, we're doing this, we're doing that. And then you say, yeah, but maybe asset owners say, we're not adopting that. But now I'm hearing from asset owners saying, well, too much money at stake. Here's what we can do. Now, is there a grave concern of now, how do we safely implement some of this stuff? Yes.
Yeah.
And there's acknowledgement that data going out to the cloud to process, analyze, do stuff, that's one thing. And there's obviously some great technologies to protect data going out and not coming back. But there's people saying, no, we're also talking about data coming back. We're talking about processing it in the data lake, making great use of massive amounts of data, coming back and attenuating things. But here's what's at stake financially to be able to do that. Oof. Okay.
It's the most interesting time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably a great way to end this session. Listen, Andrew, Derek, I really appreciate the time. Fascinating conversations. And what we will do is I think Kara will be following up with the audience with further information for Andrew in his latest book, Derek, the Level Zero Conference, and really appreciate you guys joining us today. And the audience, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. Operational technology is at the heartbeat of modern industries, and securing these systems has never been more crucial. I'd like to thank Roger and our guest, Derek Harp and Andrew Ginter, for joining in and sharing their knowledge, passion, and experiences. If you had a question that didn't get answered, or you'd like to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or go to hillstrongsecurity.com. I'll be posting links today to Roger's ebooks, Andrew's latest book, and Derek's upcoming conference. Hillstrong does these live webinars monthly, so be sure to watch out for your next invite. Have a great day.